At this hour, I could say that I'm the late Linnaeus. However, distinguished professors, scientists, students, and the rest of you, it's a great honor for you to meet me. How can I say such a thing? Well, I can say it with the support of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who said there is no one greater on this earth than Linnaeus. Goethe, he said Shakespeare, Spinoza, and Linnaeus gave me my inspiration. Shakespeare, Spinoza, and Linnaeus. That's very good company for them. And I'm happy to see that here in Washington, in this beautiful museum, and arranged by this fantastic institution, that you celebrate me by inviting people who give lectures about that most of the things I achieved is not any more modern and should not be used anymore. Barcodes. The only barcode I know is how to read the barcode when I was in Amsterdam. Wanted to see some ladies. That's the only barcode I know about. However, I would like to spend some moments together with you telling about my favorite subject, myself. I wrote 5 autobiographies. In one of them, I point out 19 subjects where I was the greatest on earth. There's never been a greater botanist, there's never been a greater zoologist, and so on and so forth. And why don't we start with the birth? I was born in the month of May, 1707. My father was a Lutheran pastor in a province of Sweden in the south called Småland. And he had a passion, not only for his work, but also for nature, and especially gardening. He had a beautiful garden, rich with flowers, and people came from far to see this garden. And when I was in the cradle, I could watch flowers. He decorated my cradle with flowers. And I was looking at the flowers, and I was smiling. One day he had forgotten the flowers, and I was crying. So my father, he implanted in me already in the cradle the fascination for flowers and botany. And when I grew up, I decided, no, I don't want to become a Lutheran pastor. I want to study medicine. And I did so at the University of Uppsala. And unfortunately, in those days, the Faculty of Medicine was in a poor state. And out of the 400 students at the university, only 10 studied medicine. It was impossible to receive any grants if you studied medicine. And actually, I was starving at times. I had no food. I couldn't buy food. Books, very difficult. And lectures, well, the 2 professors, Professor Rudbeck and Professor Roberg, rarely gave any lectures. Different reasons for that. And I was just about to give up when one day I met Olof Celsius. And Olof Celsius, he was so impressed by me, my visions and my knowledge. So he said, I can see your situation. Come to my house. You don't have to pay anything. You will have a room, you will have food, and you will have access to my library. So Olof Celsius, what is Olof Celsius famous for? Temperature. And by the way, I met Mr. Fahrenheit when I was in Holland. A very strange man. But all of Celsius, what is centigrade, and what happens at 0? Freeze and 100 boils. Oh, you know something about Celsius. That's good. But unfortunately, it's the wrong Celsius. All of Celsius has nothing to do with temperature. But he had a brother who had a son whose name was Anders Celsius. And Anders Celsius actually put 0 at the boiling point of water and 100 at the freezing point. And then he died with an extreme body temperature. And I saw this thermometer and I said to myself, this is no good. This is much better. And I ordered a new one. And that is the thermometer that most intelligent countries on this earth is using. I said once that you should not drink too much alcohol. Alcohol is not good for you. Water is much better. And I belong to the 18th century movement against using too much alcohol. We had a slogan, children under the age of 12 should not drink more than 6 or 7 glasses of vodka a day. So you can understand the situation in my country. I don't like this dot in my face. There you go. Now, Olof Celsius, he was a theologist, but also a keen botanist. And I was very thankful to him. So when I wrote my first paper at the University of Uppsala, I dedicated it to Celsius. The title, Preludia Sponsaliorum Plantarum, about the foreplay to the wedding of flowers. Was this my idea? No, actually not. Where can such an idea come from? Flowers, making love. From France, of course. Vaillant wrote about this 1718, and I had read his paper on it. But I developed his ideas. And Celsius, he was very flattered that I wrote about flower sex in his name. So he showed this paper to his friends, most of them theologists, and they were in shock. They thought it was terrible. But the professors of science, they saw something here, and they decided we have to send this man to Lapland, to the northern part of Sweden, to investigate the fauna and flora. So I was sent to Lapland, and I traveled through Lapland for 6 months and found a lot of new, interesting things. And during this journey, I met a fisherman, and I asked him, if you cut yourself while you're working, what kind of bandage do you put on? What kind of herb will you put on? And I met this farmer's wife, and I said, if you have a headache, what kind of herb will you use to cure your headache? I was asking and asking and asking. And this is the reason why Paul Allen Cox, a professor from this country, gave a lecture during the International Botanist Congress in St. Louis, 1999, about my journey to Lapland. And during this lecture, he stated, Linnaeus' journey to Lapland is the starting point for a new science, ethnobotany. And we should all, 5 times a day, pray in the direction of Uppsala. Nice, professor. I returned from Lapland, and I went to Dalarna, another province in Sweden, to investigate its natural resources. I did so. I even investigated the resources of females, found Sara-Lisa, wanted to marry her. But I had a problem that I think you're aware of. I was very small in those days. I was about this height. And to prove to Sara-Lisa that size doesn't matter, I wanted to show her that I was a brave man. And one of the bravest things I had done, I had visited the wild people of the north, the Lapps, the Sami people. And I had a Lappic costume to prove it. So I dressed as a Lapp when I met Sara-Lisa. And she was impressed. And she said, yes, I want to marry you. But it took more than Lappic costumes to impress the parents. They said, maybe. Under 3 conditions, you can marry our daughter. Number 1, you have to be a doctor first. Number 2, you have to have a good income. Number 3, you cannot see her for 3 years. What to do? Well, I had to go to Holland. Why? Because you couldn't become a doctor of medicine in Sweden in those days. You could study the subject, but you couldn't become a doctor. You had to go abroad. I went to Holland. It was nearby. And I was in a hurry. I didn't have much money. And I went to the town of Harderwijk. There was a song about Harderwijk. Harderwijk is the town where they are selling blueberries, herring, and doctor degrees. That was the line. So after 1 week of intense studies, I became a doctor. Unfortunately, for those of you who are not doctors yet, Napoleon closed the university in Harderwijk later on. But now I hear you can buy them on the internet. Yes. Strange world. However, I remained the 3 years in Holland, and it was in Holland that I published my Systema Naturae, the topic of the day. And Systema Naturae, that is where I classify the 3 forms of life according to me: animals, plants, and stones, minerals. I know that today you believe that stones are stone dead. But during the 1700s, many scientists believe that stones have a primitive life energy. They are growing. There's life in them. And I come from a farmer's district in Sweden where every farmer knows that new stones are growing in the fields every year. Maybe even here in the Washington area, I don't know. When I classified the animals, I classified Homo sapiens, man, as a mammal. Then a French scientist, Dr. Delamitrie, got very upset. And he said, Linnaeus put us humans together with cows and horses. I am not a horse. It might be so that Dr. Linnaeus is a horse, but I'm a man and I'm superior to the animals. And what was my response? My response was the following: nothing. Because I had a rule never to get into fights with other scientists. And actually, Jean-Jacques Rousseau once said, I should have followed the example of the famous professor from Uppsala. Then my life would have been much easier. So, what happens if you say nothing when you attack like that? Someone else is doing the dirty job for you, if you have friends. And one of my friends was Voltaire. Voltaire said, Dr. Linnaeus, a horse, how fascinating. But then you have to admit, he is the number 1 among horses. When I classified the plants, I classified from the number of sexual parts within the flowers. And this was the work of a genius, said many people, but not a German scientist based in St. Petersburg by the name of Sigesbeck. Sigesbeck said, Linnaeus from Sweden will destroy our young people with his absurd ideas about the sex life of plants. And who could believe that the innocent flowers created by God was living like prostitutes? Again, I said nothing, but I named a plant, Sigesbeckia orientalis. It's one of the most ugly-looking weeds on earth. Well, I returned from Holland. I started medical practice in Stockholm. I was running it for 3 years, and I earned a lot of money because I became a specialist in venereal diseases. And I cured most of them with wine or mercury. So the patients came to me suffering from this disease. I used the mercury to cure them, and they were okay after 2 weeks. That they felt like thermometers for the rest of their lives was a side effect. Actually, there was a saying in those days, because mercury never cured the disease. It just eased the problems for some time, and then the patient had to come back. It's really good business for us doctors. I don't like the modern medical companies. They seem to have the ambition to produce medicines that actually cure people. The patient comes, you give the pill, and you never see him again. That's bad business. However, someone said that one night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury. And during those days, I married Sara Lisa, 1739, became the professor of medicine in Uppsala, 1741. And now I received students from all over the world, from England, Italy, France, Russia, even from America, from Philadelphia, Adam Kuhn. And I also sent my students all over the world. I sent Thunberg to Japan, and I hear about PhD students today. They go to Africa or South America or Asia, and they go home for Christmas. Thunberg, when he wanted to go to Japan, he had to spend 9 years. One of the reasons was that he was not Dutch, and it was only the Dutch who were allowed to be in Japan in those days, except for the Japanese, of course. And Thunberg, he was in Holland for some time. He picked up the Dutch language. He spent 3 years in South Africa. He spent time in Sri Lanka, was Ceylon in those days, and also on Java. And then he was in Japan for 15 months. And in Japan, outside Nagasaki, the Japanese had built a small island for the Dutch, and they were not allowed to be anywhere else but on that island, except for once a year, when there was a delegation to the shogun in Edo. And Thunberg, luckily enough, was allowed to follow that expedition or the delegation, and he could secretly collect plants, which was forbidden. Now, Thunberg, he wrote a Flora Japonica. Then we have Sparman, who traveled with Captain Cook on Resolution down to the Antarctica and to the South Pacific. And we have Forskål, who went to the Arab world. We have Falk, who went to Russia. We have Löfling, who went to South America. We have Kalm, who went to North America. And Per Kalm, he stayed for some time in the home of a family called Rambo. I don't know if you're all aware of this little story, but if you're not, I'm going to tell it now. Peter Gunnarsson from Gothenburg, Sweden, 1640, emigrated to North America. He thought that Gunnarsson was too complicated, so he wanted a short name. In Gothenburg, there is a mountain called Ramberget, and he invented the name Rambo. Bo is the place where you live. And of course here, it was not Rambo, but Rambo. So Peter Gunnarsson Rambo was the first Rambo. And he brought with him, among other things, a small apple tree. And it's called the Rambo apple after him. And Johnny Appleseed was in love with this apple and spread it to many different places. And when Kalm came here, he heard about this apple and stayed with the Rambo family. 1972, of course I don't know much about this, but I'm supposed to be dead. But I don't care too much about that. 1972, David Morrell wrote a book that became a film called First Blood. He asked his wife, what do you think is a good name for the action hero? She just came back from the garden with a basket full of Rambo apples and said, why don't you call him Rambo, darling? So Sylvester Stallone is a Swedish apple. Now, so my students, they went all over the world. Solander, of course, he went to South America, to Tahiti, to New Zealand, to Australia. And because of Solander, there is a botany bay in Australia. And they collected plants and animals and minerals, and many of them sent these things to me in Uppsala, where I classified them and gave names. From 1753 and onwards, I gave names according to my own system that you heard so much about today, I have understood. And some of those names still survive, even though some people try to change everything. Now, I can tell you that I'm not against barcodes or all these other things that you have described today. I'm not against change. Actually, I'm fascinated. My country house outside Uppsala called Hammarby. My time is over, or what? Anyway, it has a wallpaper. And the wallpaper is individual paintings of different flowers by Eret and others that I glued to the walls in 2 rooms. So that is the wallpaper. And now they are trying all the modern techniques to preserve these things, to keep it as it was in those days. And actually, once I wrote, when I'm dead and gone, take away that wallpaper, put something new. And it's the same thing with my science. And actually, I said once that I have done the work with a rough planer. After me, people will come with a fine sandpaper and do to make the work look even more beautiful. I think I will finish this little talk now by quoting my favorite writer, myself. By the way, quoting myself, I wrote 72 books. 72 books. And there was the need of reviews. Sometimes I couldn't wait for the reviews, so I wrote them myself under a false name. Very good reviews, actually. In one of them, I congratulate the author, myself. So, this is what I said to Thunberg when he was about to leave for Japan. Don't be afraid of exposing yourself to some degree of danger. Anyone who hopes to reach a glorious goal must take many risks. And this is the way I finished one of my lectures. No, I shouldn't do that. I should tell you a nice little story. I loved animals. Who was the zoologist here? That's a zoologist there? Someone else was a zoologist? Yes. Oh, there you are, yes. Nice name, by the way. I loved the animals. I had so many animals. I had raccoons. I had guinea pigs, peacocks, parrots, different monkeys, snakes. I had all these different exotic animals. And I love the animals. And one of the parrots could imitate my voice. So if you knocked the door and no one was there, the parrot would shout with my voice, "Enter, please." And so many other stories. I also had a dog. The dog's name was Pompe. And Pompe followed me everywhere, even when I went to church. And during the summertime, I spent the summer, during the summer, I spent my time out at Hammarby, the country house. And to get to the church, I walked through the forest. It's about 45 minutes walk. And Pompey was with me. And I managed to convince the Lutheran pastor that I had to have the dog with me in the church. He was against it, but finally I was allowed to bring the dog. And Pompey was with me, no problem. Unfortunately, this Lutheran pastor gave very long preachings. And I decided if he is preaching for more than 1 hour, I will leave the church in the middle of the preaching. And so it happened. And he was furious. It happened again. And he was even more furious. And then one Sunday, I didn't feel well. Everybody stayed home to look after me, except for Pompey, my dog. He was so used to the habit, so he went to church by himself. And he was walking into the church, sat down, listened to the hymns and to the preaching for 1 hour. Then he got up, barked at the pastor, and left. And before you start barking at me, I will finish this little lecture of mine. So, this is how I finish one of my lectures. Therefore, gather on your way imperishable flowers, fear of the Lord, diligence, orderliness, willingness to serve, and the crown imperial, honesty. Now, in God's name, have I brought my collegium to an end. Thank you. Thank you. One more thing. If you ever come to Sweden, bring a microscope, because there is a hidden secret message on the 100-kroner note. If you have a microscope, you can find something that I wrote in Latin. It says, omnia mirari etiam tritissima. And you can only see it with a microscope, which is the beauty of it, because the meaning is also the small things deserve our attention. Thank you.